Hello and good morning. I'm Turtleon, also known as Turtleon or Turts. I'm the guy responsible for much of the frame data posted online you see for this game. Not the only guy working on the frame data, thank God and thank Rin, but one of the guys anyway. And welcome to listening to my rambles on Dragon Ball FighterZ frame data. As you may have noticed already, I'm not a native speaker of English, so bear with me. I decided it was better for me to make a video on this topic and for you to listen to it and to see for your own eyes, rather than me writing a 10-page essay on the subject, so it's easier for all of us. Well, what this video contains is the basic fundamental idea of just what frame data is. Also, we'll be going through what frame data is and how it matters in Dragon Ball FighterZ, how you can apply it, and what kind of ground rules it has, and what are the exceptions, etc. Also, we'll be going forward, or when we're going forward, we'll be going through many examples of how Vanish or Spark Advantage works and stuff like that. Many minor details that you might not be aware of, things that might be different from what they seem or what you might think they are. Also, we'll be going through these damage scalings and prorations and how damage works in Dragon Ball FighterZ in general, because I've noticed a lot of people have trouble grasping that subject, and that's what this video was made for. It's come to my attention that many of you don't really understand frame data or what it is, why it's important, and or you just plain don't know how to apply it into your game plan or how to interpret the data posted online, what the numbers mean. And this is what the video was made for. It's for you to understand them better and for you to utilize the resources we hardworking frame data libraries have provided to you. So, yay. I expect things from you when you start watching this guide. The things I expect from you is just understanding the basic core mechanics of the game. You don't need to understand everything thoroughly, but you understand what a universal overhead is, what Vanish does, how Spark works. On the basic level anyway. You don't need to know the exact frames of what's happening or the exact numbers of what's happening, but you know, the basic idea and the basic concept of how those moves are used and how they can be utilized is just enough. Also, I expect you to know the numpad notation. If you don't know what numpad notation is, you should Google it immediately. It's basically a language system that's intended for inputs in fighting games, especially in anime fighting games, which is what Dragon Ball FighterZ is. It can also be easily located in most of the Dragon Ball FighterZ character discords. I highly suggest you join those places. They are great communities for, you know, developing your character further and learning from experts. Without further ado, let's dive into the basics of frame data. And if you want a more comprehensive, educational and more entertaining video on the subject of just basic frame data, you should look up Core A Gaming's video called Core A Gaming, What Makes a Move Overpowered. But basically, it's a very fun video about just what frame data, what the boxes and startups and actives are in general. And this is knowledge that's applicable in every fighting game you've ever played or will play, probably in the future. Fighting games are probably not gonna make that drastic of a change, so boxes still matter, startups still matter, actives still matter. It's in Street Fighter, it's in Guilty Gear, it's in Dragon Ball, it's in Samurai Showdown, it's every game you've ever played with as a fighting game. It's also applicable in games like Call of Duty, but it doesn't matter as much there as it does in this game. So, let's dive into or take a dip in the basics of frame data. So this game runs at 60 frames per second. It's very universal across all fighting games. All fighting games, or most of them, run at 60 frames per second. All modern ones run 60 frames per second. Even some games dating back to the 80s and the 90s run 60 frames per second. It's a staple of the genre in general, and it's a very good method of measuring time within these games. It also helps you to put things in perspective. When we say things like a 6-frame jab, you know, oh, 6 out of 60, that's 1/10. Oh yeah, 1/10 of a second. You don't need to convert frames into seconds to understand frame data. It just helps to put things in perspective, just how fast some moves are and how reactable they should be. The game's own time code is frames, so everything is measured in frames. So you need to kind of insert yourself into the world of fighting games and measure your time in frames to understand better. So let's take this more small detour about boxes, what the boxes are. Well, currently you're seeing Dragon Ball Fighters on PC with a mod that displays hitboxes and hurtboxes. The green ones you see on my character right here are hurtboxes, and the red ones are hitboxes. These are very self-explanatory. Basically, when a red box makes contact with a green box, a hit occurs. Very simple, right? And the same thing occurs on block 2. It's not the animations doing the work. You can see me hitting his hand, but it's just the animations. It's the behind the scenes, the boxes doing all the work here. So it's actually good for you to know just how big your anti-air actually is when you look at it in the background and stuff like that. Oh well, and then we have the yellow boxes at Hit's feet there. It's a collision box or a push box. All it does is it acts as a gravitational point for your character. Yellow boxes make contact with yellow boxes and they push each other. They are the gravitational points of the character. Then we have a fourth kind of frame box, which is the throw box. If you were not aware, there's throws in the game and they don't make contact with the green boxes. You can see the red throw hit box overlapping with Hit's hurt boxes, but nothing happens. Basically, there's an invisible throw hurt box that only makes contact with throw hit boxes, which are visible to us. Usually it's a small box, could be a pixel even for all we know, that's located just in the middle of the collision box. That's basically the rule of thumb. It's tidbit information, but it helps put things in perspective, just why some throw boxes are huge like that, and why they're not really that huge since they need to hit really deep. But yeah, that's box data. That's the basic idea of boxes. Now you know what boxes are. Now let's talk about the numbers. The 3 musketeers of frame data. We're talking about startup, active, and recovery. Now, virtually any move or every move in the game has startup, active, and recovery. Startup measures the time it takes for you to throw the punch out there, how much time it takes for it to deal damage. Now, if we take something like a jab, you can see the attack startup on the left. It displays a 6. It means on the 6th frame, it's capable of dealing damage. The last frame of startup is always the first frame of actives. Now, what is not displayed by the frame data counter here is the active period, which I have charted in the spreadsheet for all of you to see. Now, Hit's jab, as most jabs in the game, is 3 frames active. They're usually very short, and the more you have actives, the better the move tends to be, because the more time it has more time to deal damage. If you stick out a limb and this was 10 frames active, it's easier for your opponent to stumble into it, and therefore you to start a combo or deal damage in general. So actives matter. Many ground crabs, for instance, only have 1 frames of actives, so they would be easier to evade, since crabs are pretty pretty strong. Now let's talk about recovery. Now recovery is when you're pulling back the punch to assume you're fighting your tenkaichi stance, so you can act again, right? You're exerting force into the punch, so you need to recover from it in order to move again. The same rules apply in real life, right? When we're looking at the move, the frame advantage displays -20. It takes 20 frames in total for the move to finish. Now we have 6 frames of startup and 3 frames of active, and because the last frame of startup is the first frame of active, we kind of have like 5 frames of wind up and 3 frames of active. 5 plus 3 equals 8. 20 minus 8, alright, 12. So we have 12 frames of recovery. That might seem like a lot in comparison to the startup and the active period, but when you compare it to other moves like a 2H for instance, it's suddenly pretty short. They could have something like 20 frames of recovery. The less you have recovery, it is usually better, because the recovery period is, if you're whiffing a move like this, you're punishable for a long time. Now this is not as punishable because you're only vulnerable for 12 frames. And it's already a fast move and hard to react to. Right, it makes sense. Well, that's basically what recovery is. Now, let's talk about advantage real quick. So, whenever we make an attack and it makes contact with the opponent's hurt box, a hit occurs. Now it's a block hit. You know, this is block stun, right? And if it were to hit, it's hit stun. Very self-explanatory. One is when you're hitting the opponent, one is when the opponent is blocking. Now these have set amount of hit stuns and block stuns. Every move has this coded into them, hard-coded some advantage or some either on hits or on block, right? So how advantage works is basically you're taking the block stun the move causes and subtracting your attack recovery from it. So now that we have an attack that's 3 frames active and 12 frames recovery, it's basically 15 frames of attack recovery when the first active makes contact with the opponent, and the opponent recovers 3 frames faster than we do. So, because we're -3, as the frame data counter shows there. So basically they have 12 frames of block stun and we have 15 frames of recovery. Now 12 minus 15 is -3 for us, right? You don't need to do math like this all the time. That's why spreadsheets online like mine have only advantage displayed, because it's really the only thing that matters. You don't need to know the math, we want to know the answer to the math problem, right? And we've already done that for you. And the game already does it for you as well live. But it can be a bit janky, but we'll return to that subject later. Anyway. Now we've scraped the surface of advantage a bit. We'll be returning to the subject a bit later because it gets pretty complex, but for now you have the basic fundamental idea of what frame data is and how frame data works. If you have more questions about that, you can always DM me or search me up on Twitter, Discord, YouTube, and just send me a message. Alright, so let's take a deep dive to the frame data in Dragon Ball FighterZ. Now let's go through some typical frames of the game. So we have 35 characters in the game as of patch 1.17, since GT Goku arrived. 35 characters in the game, and 31 of these characters have a 6-frame jab. So 6-frame jab is basically the universal startup for a jab. There's 4 7-frame jabs in the game. These belong to Android 16, Broly, Nappa, and Vegito. So those are the exception guys, but they don't really matter that much. It all has to correspond with advantages, and we'll be returning to those a bit later, as I said, so you can understand options, what are available at different advantages. Okay, so then we have parries like this, or you know, Nappa has a guard point parry. This this is actually an exception, but let's talk about parries in general. So nearly all parries or 2H's, something that has invulnerability that isn't immediately invulnerable, is nearly always 4 frames. Every 2H in the game takes 4 frames. Its 4th frame becomes an anti-air. You can't hit it with a jumping button. Everybody knows that, but it's on the 4th frame. It's not immediate. The same thing applies to virtually every parry in the game, if it's not an exception like Jiren's EX parry, which is frame 1, or Nappa's guard point parry, which is frame 5. So nearly all of them are 4 frames. Why you need to know things like this is that if you are doing something like Vanish, which is frame advantage 2, it means the opponent has exactly 4 frames to act if we are challenging him with a 6-frame jab. So he can challenge us back with a 4-frame parry and win the situation to himself, or themselves, herself. Right? Okay. So, but we'll be discussing about those advantage options later. Then we have straight up frame 1 reversals, like the universal reflect. It's invincible on the 1st frame to the 22nd frame, and it's always 39 frames, meaning that if you hit this move, the remaining 17 frames will become the reflect itself as well. It will no longer be 17 frames of recovery, it will be 17 frames of more reflect, and kinda the recovery just disappears. Right? Alright, so now you know a bit about the basics frames, the fastest, the most vital frames of the game. Now let's talk about a bit about chaining and recovery cancelling. It might sound a bit more complex than it really is. Basically, if we take a move like a standing light attack, which now is -3, and then we do something like this, well, your opponent should have 3 frames to act. But if we're doing this, we can't even reflect it for some reason, right? Well, it's because there's a recovery cancel. So basically, if you have a normal or special that can Gatling into another normal or special, you can do so immediately after the actives have run out of the former move. So basically, when we're doing a jab which has 3 frames active, the moment it enters recovery, you can already buffer a second move, and the second move startup takes over the recovery of the first move. It's very simple. So if it has this property, you can always cancel into each other. There are some small differences where you need to wait for like 2 frames, but they're virtually invisible and don't really matter at all. And these frames are accounted for in my spreadsheet as well. Alright, so there's another form of cancelling as well. You might know a thing like a jumping H. You can see this is a slow ass button. Takes roughly 38 frames to complete in total. Yet we can do it as low to the ground as possible. You still hear it coming out, but the move doesn't come out. This is landing recovery, so landing always cancels any move that makes contact with the ground from the air. There are some exceptions to this. Let's take this for instance, dive kicks or specials that need to land on the ground. They can have varying hitboxes but with those upon landing, but the rule of thumb is if it's a normal, it can't be landing cancelled, and this is the reason you don't see advantages displayed from jumping normals in my frame data sheet, or most specials even, because they vary depending on when you land. You can see now it's +1 frame advantage, now it's suddenly +3, now it's +13 or +12 if you account for the landing lag. It just doesn't make sense charting out those, and this is the reason you should not. Even though I like the format, you should not trust dust loop, because there's things like Android 16's frame data page showing frame advantage for jumping normals. You can't really trust information when well, those advantages kind of don't exist because they're highly situation dependent. They're basically velocity and height and frame perfect scenarios where those things apply, right? Okay, so now that we're talking about landing recovery, let's talk a bit about more on the subject. So landing can be cancelled. If I land, you can see I'm -1. So you would think landing takes about 1 frame, but this is in fact incorrect. Landing takes 3 frames in total. So it takes 3 frames for you to move again. But the thing is, landing recovery is cancelable. On the second frame of landing, you can cancel it into forward dash or an attack. This is why you see -1 on the frame data, or you know, the frame advantage counter, because it stops counting the disadvantage or the advantage the moment you can cancel it, right? In the increments or whatever those are in English anyway. So the second frame is cancelable with forward dash and attack, and that's it. You can't cancel it with anything else. Of course, you can block on the first frame of landing from the first frame forward. Oh, hello, my dog is here. Well, yeah, but you can cancel it into a block on the first frame, basically, and to an attack or a forward dash on the second. And to do anything else, you need to wait for the 3 frames to go past. And this is actually very important when we are talking about, you know, these advantages in general. But we'll return to that in just a moment. Now there's things like additional landing lag. Let me see if I can actually get a glimpse of it here. No. Yeah, well, yeah, there it was. You can see now I'm no longer -1. Now Nappa is -3. And this is many specials or unique attacks airborne have actually additional landing lag upon landing. And this is a different form of landing recovery. There is no cancelability, not even block. So when I do this move and land, I'm susceptible to any attack for 3 frames. I can't do jack shit about it. That's why you don't want to move or use moves like Trunks' command flips or stuff like that, which generate a hell of a lot more, can be even -10 frame advantage upon landing, because it's highly punishable and the opponent can very clearly see it, right? So that's the basic idea about landing lag. Now let's talk about advantage. Let's take a deep dive in the advantage section and also insert that landing recovery there. So we know how advantage is formulated, what causes this advantage. Well, if we do something like a vanish, the frame data, or you know, the frame advantage counter shows us that we're +3, but the increments show +2. Now, why is that? Basically, what it means is that we are +3, but the very first frame we can act is the very first frame of our landing recovery from this move. So 1 frame is taken from us, from our advantage, because we cannot do anything about it. But on the second frame, we can cancel it into an attack, right? That's why we're +2. Now, if we take something like, let's say that we both try to jump, it happens identically at the same time. And this is because if we try to do anything else rather than attacking or forward dashing, we need to wait for the full 3 frames of landing recovery, which also happens to be the exact same amount of our advantage to move. So when you're trying anything but attacking or forward dashing, you're on equal grounds with your opponent, and this causes a lot of disarray and misconceptions about how vanish is advantageous in this game anyway. It's not that good of an advantage when you think about it. And it really, if you think about characters that have a parry from this, we can't strike them really. They can challenge our jab, and knowing this, they're always on equal ground when we're trying to move, because everything other than attacking or forward dashing is on the same grounds with them, right? So that's a thing many people don't note about vanish advantage, but you should know. Now, let's talk more about advantage in general. You may have heard things about meeting, and if this is a foreign word to you, let me explain it to you. Basically, you know, an attack has several frames of actives. For a system, for instance, the universal overhead has 6 frames of actives, right? Well, usually, if we're here, at point blank range, it's usually the first active to make contact, right? Now the rest of the actives kinda decay. They can hit assists later, if one is called or so, but basically they can't hit the same target multiple times. It's a singular strike, right? But basically it's an attack data that occurs on each of the frames. So each of these frames is capable of dealing the exact same of hit stun and block stun. What meeting is hitting the opponent with the latter, you know, actives. Not the first, but the second or anything further from that. And why you would want to do that is if you check on the frame advantage counter right now, I'm +2 on a move that is normally 0. So that further you can hit with this, the more advantageous you can be. It's kind of hard to replicate and usually requires a specific setup to work, but can be often done in things like OQ. Well, it's still hard to time, and this is advanced stuff, but anyway, that's basically what meeting is. And you know, you want to meaty things so you can link attacks that normally wouldn't be possible. If we take this move, it's normally +3, as you can see on hit, so it would mean that if I were to hit the opponent on the 4th frame of actives, I would recover 3 frames sooner than I normally would from the attack, which would give me +6 advantage, which on a 6-frame jab would mean I could combo solo from a universal overhead when I meaty enough, right? Okay, so now you know what meeting is and what you can virtually accomplish with it. Now let's talk about air blocking. Let's take this Bardock's JL, for instance. You can see the opponent is recovering from the block on the ground. Bardock is recovering from the attack in the air, so there's no variables right here. It's always the same if the opponent blocks airborne, right? But it isn't. If we take something like hit blocking this move in the air, you can see it flashes -2 there. Every attack blocked on the air or in air causes additional 2 frames of block stun. This is tidbit information and really isn't applicable to many situations, but it is there. Blocking in the air causes 2 frames of additional block stun. But now let's take something that is actually practical. Come on, let me hit you. Now, like this. Alright, yes, you can see this move is 4. But normally it is -2. Why is that? Well, that's because landing in block stun adds 6 frames of total block stun. Which means how you can apply this into your game plan is that any move that is safe, which means anything that isn't punishable, which is -5 or from -5 to 0, basically. It means that anything that's safe and connects on an airborne opponent is now plus, because -5 plus 6 is 1. I'm not saying be a madman and just, you know, auto combo the living fuck out of your opponent, but it can cause you to gain more advantage. It was blocking there. Well, anyway, you get the drift. So chart out moves that you can use to catch airborne opponents more easily and force them to land blocking so you can get more frame advantage, right? Now many people might not know that. They might think this move is punishable or, you know, grants them a turn on block, which usually would, but now you can steal a turn and even punish them if they don't know this tech. It's important for you to know. Okay, so let's what do we have next? Well, that's basically all there is about, you know, blocking and advantage. That's basically it. If we take a further example on this matter, we have Spark, right? This is 0 on block, but you can see this is the same thing as the Vanish again. The first frame we're ready to act is actually the first frame of our landing. That's why we're -1 and we're able to act on the -2 again, right? So actually this is not 0 on block, and you cannot challenge from this with a jab, because the opponent's 6-frame jab will hit you 1 frame sooner if you both try to challenge with a jab. Important things to know again. Let's talk a bit about special states. And by special states I'm merely talking about invincibilities, as Arxis has cleverly dubbed in this training mode. Anyway, when we jump you can see these throw invulnerability flash. It means I'm throw invulnerable for the amount of time I'm in jump startup, which is 4 frames. Jump startup is in a way 5 frames, but the wind-up is 4 frames, so you're on the ground for 4 frames, in the air on the 5th, right? So for 4 frames, for the duration of the jump startup on the ground, you are throw invulnerable. This applies to aerial backdashes, which is 15 frames too, and normal backdashes, which are 15 frames throw invulnerable too. Now we have different states of invincibilities. There's throw invincibility, there's intangibility, or as the game has dubbed, invincibility. It cannot be hit during it, but it can be thrown. And that is what the basic invincibility means in this game. There's stuff like guard points. Nappa has this move, if any of you ever played a Nappa. An endangered Nappa, to say this is a guard point. Basically it's not invulnerability, it causes a block animation during the move, but it blocks everything, right? Well, yeah. Now this particular guard point doesn't block everything. You can see it's a non-proj, which is non-projectile short. It means that every projectile you throw at it will go through it. Yeah, as you can see. But it will catch all strikes. There are things like projectile invincibility as well, like this move. But then again, things like intangibility work against it as well. And then there's this... I'm not going to change characters right now, but there is a lie that the invincibility counter also tells you, which is armor. Basically, there's a form of invincibility which is armor, but the game just calls it invincibility, just like this move, but it acts completely different. If you don't know what armor is, basically stops your opponent from halting your moves. So this is namely what Broly does. all of his specials have armor, for instance. If he does a special, you hit him, he doesn't stop the move, he just flashes bright red and takes a bit of damage, 50% to be precise, and continues the move just as he is. And armor works in the way of points. Broly's most specials or normals have 1 point of armor, 1 tick of armor, which means that if you strike it once, it goes into the armor. If you strike it twice, the armor disappears and there's no more armor. And Broly is stopped from the move. That's why he's Lariat, the 4-frame quick train motion attack. It works as a parry because it has 10 frames, 10 points of armor, which means it's virtually impossible to stop. You would need something equivalent of like 3 beams to stop that move. Okay, but that's basically all of the invincibility states. There's also these parry invincibilities. This is actual invincibility as well, so it can be grabbed as well, as are most of Jiren's parries as well, for instance. But they don't really show if they're low parries or high parries. I think, at least, I'm not sure. But these things are noted in the frame data sheet I've provided. Also, there is the actual invulnerability, which is full invincibility, as the frame data counter shows there. All level 3s are full invincible. You cannot be grabbed, you cannot be attacked, and usually how invincibility works in general is just that your hurt boxes disappear. Even though they are shown here, they kinda don't exist, because no contact is ever made with the attacks and the hurt box. Okay, so now we talked a bit about the special states. Now let's talk about damage. And damage is a funny thing. We'll be returning to some special examples, some particular universal frame data I've applied in my sheet. But let's go to my frame data sheet real quick. So here you can see the universal frame data. Let's take a character here, for example. Well, I'm a hit player, so I want to take hit as an example. Very simple for me to understand. So we have things like damage. This increment here shows just how much damage the attack has. What's the damage value of the move? And this thing here is the initial scaling and the proration in a combo. This is what it means. So basically, when we're starting out with a jab, it deals the 400 damage, and the second move you usually do after a light might be something like a 5LL or a 5M, which is 700 damage. Now we take 700 and times 0.8 for 80%, and the move does 560 damage. So the initial scaling shows you how much damage the second move will deal, and these will apply to damage scaling charts, which are not shown in this frame data page here, but you can search for them online, and the ones provided in Dust Loop appear to be pretty credible, so you can trust them. Basically what it does is different moves cause different scaling tables. So mediums have the best scaling tables. It might be something like the first hit always deals 100% damage. The second hit, which is shown here, is 90%, then it's 70%, then it's 70%, then it's 70%, then it's 60%, and so on. But usually specials that may have something like this 70% might be just 70%, 60, 50, 30, 20, 10, 10, 10, 10 times infinity. And the thing about this is that the better the scaling is at the start, like mediums, have more of these pauses within the scaling table, where a single scaling is provided multiple times, like 70% might repeat there 3 times, whereas on a worse scaling table it might just jump from one percentage to another every time a hit occurs, right? And every hit prorates the combo further. That's what the +1 means, by the way. That's how much it jumps further. Basically, if you're at 90% plus one hit more to the proration, it's 80%. If we're thinking that the scaling is just as simple as from 100 to 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, and so on, it would go plus one is always 10% further, right? But then we have things like aspiration, which is always plus two, which means that if we are starting at 90% and then we hit with an assist, it doesn't go to 80%, it jumps straight to 70%, right? Now, and that's what the proration does. Basically, if a move has a lot of proration, it kills your scaling more swiftly, and you don't want that. You want moves with plus one proration and good scaling. Also, the thing about scaling tables, what makes mediums, for instance, very good, is that the minimum scaling for an attack is 15%, whereas on the worst tables like jab starters or most special starters, they tend to be 10%. So once the scaling is at minimum, every move you deal will deal half more than it would on the worst scaling table. But you can find those things online, and the ones on Dustloop, as I said, are fairly credible. So that's basically how damage scaling and proration work. They're very simple. We can search for Dustloop damage right here and check the scaling for ourselves. Alright, we need to specify the game too. So here we have the damage scaling tables. I haven't noted which table my attacks use, but they usually follow a very certain pattern of these are mediums and heavies, these are lights and jumping attacks, and these are usually specials. So it's very simple. This is a bit wrong actually, I think, but well, anyway, there's a Reddit post. I'll find it and link it in the video description as well. It was very well made and very comprehensible about things that happen there. One thing, there's many schools of thoughts and languages when we're talking about frame data and damage scaling. You know, these names for all these things. If you look at the Reddit post, it speaks about forced proration, not combo proration. Forced proration is basically when we're talking about this plus two thing right here. It means that forced proration would notate this as us plus one, whereas I'm notating it as plus two because the forced proration table thinks that, or you know, believes that every move always prorates by one. So if it's forced by plus one, it's plus one, which is a plus two, right? But I'm making it a bit more simple than that by just showing it how much it prorates with a single number. But yeah, that's basically how damage scaling works in DBFZ. When we're talking about damage in general, well, you know, 10,000 HP is the maximum HP of a character. Scaling doesn't really apply. The supers, they all have their own minimum scaling. Usually between something like 20 or 30% of their original value. It's a super specific thing. It's unique to a character and the move in question. But yeah, know this. If you like, we could take some more examples on the universal frame data. I just built this thing, and it applies to every single character in the entire game, and it's quite fun to actually watch this. So, you know this 6, and we talked about it, 6 frames active, 10 frames recovery, 20 frames, 24 frames start, which is very slow. You can see the initial scaling is horrible. You will not make big damage with these combos or combos starting with 6M, but it's a way to open up the opponent, achieve set play, O-key resets, stuff like that. So still, opening up the opponent is good. This will show you kind of neat and fun things. If you take this Dragon Rush, for example, we have things like the teching table for Dragon Rush. I will link that in the video description as well, but basically you need to take Dragon Rush before it hits you. That's the rule of thumb there. It's not a throw like in other games where it hits you and then you take it. You take it before it hits you. And you can see its actives and recovery, and the fun thing is that the green flash indicator, you know, the green round thing, when an opponent Dragon Rushes you, only appears at 7 frames. Which means that if we take 19 minus 7, we got 12 frames from the indicator, which is a fifth of a second to react to the throw. Now, the Dragon Rush is slow. You take something like Ultra Street Fighter 4, which has about the same tech window, the 12 frames to react, but the throw startup is something like 3 frames. It's way more vulgar, but essentially the reaction times are pretty much the same in this game, even though the throw is a lot more slower. I'm gonna teach you basically all of these, if you will. Super Dash is light projectile invulnerable from first frame. So basically, if you have something like a Key Blast, which can be, you know, if we return to the game, the Key Blast block stun can always be cancelled. So if Trunks does something like this, I can Super Dash within the block itself. I don't need to wait for block stun to go away. I can cancel it into a SD or a Reflect. And let me mention something fun about this too, which is notated again in my spreadsheet. It's the thing that wait a minute, is it even here? No, it's not there. Also, that's my dog sneezing. Yeah, I should add that here. But anyway, when you're in block stun and block a Key Blast, which is that block stun is cancelable with SD or Reflect, you cannot cancel for the first 5 frames. It's 5 frames non-cancelable block stun, which can result in things like, if you take something like Nappa Cyberman, which spit is a light projectile and it hits you, and then Nappa hits you immediately after with an attack, you cannot actually, there's no gaps to reflect it because the 5 frames of the light projectile block stun is non-cancelable. Fun tidbit information. Nice to know again. And also, block stun overriding is a thing. If you don't know about block stun overriding, it's that even though you hit an opponent with a heavy attack and then you make something like the Cyberman spit right after it, the heavy attack, all of the block stun, bam, goes away. Now the new block stun is the move that last hit the block, right? It makes sense, and it can result in things like block stun override setups, which is a thing that I think Leffen first showed us in Season 1. Let's see, let's take something like Cell here. I think he did it with Cell the first time. Block stun override is fun in the sense that you can make setups that normally shouldn't be possible. And Arc System Works, or Bandai Namco with their money, hasn't really patched this thing away because it's such a core mechanic and hardly abusable at all. Oh no. Actually, I need to take another character here. Where's that Cell? And the Trunks. Right, because I need to have the opponent walking in a specific direction for you to see this shit. But it's a nice piece of tech. We're past frame data knowledge right now. We're talking mainly about fun tidbit information now. So when we're blocking backwards all the time, we're not blocking cross-ups, right? But we are blocking forward. Okay. Well, this move normally cannot cross up, but if we take something like Trunks Assist, just at the right time. It's harder to achieve than I remembered. Or have they patched this away? What the fuck? Oh wait, I have it on all block. I'm a fucking idiot. Yeah, so we're doing this thing. No? I think they may have actually patched that up. No, I got it. Yeah, it's just very good. Yeah, as you can see there, now it's an actual cross-up, which normally shouldn't be, as you saw many times there. But with the right timing there, it can be achieved, and it's quite fun and makes for some very unique mix-ups and very hard to see. And it's especially strong with cells since you have the mind game of actually coming from the front too. So the block stun override causes this particular, the first attack of the perfect attack, to cause less block stun, because now the new block stun is determined by this move that hits right after it. Interesting. So anyway, let's hop back into the frame data sheet. Where were we? Alright, so we have guard cancelling. Guard cancel, as you know, is fully invulnerable. There is nothing really you can do against it, but you can anti-air it, for instance, or just plain block it and punish it. Why punishing it with TODs is easy and simple is because it's minus 30 frames. And when we're talking about the added landing lag, this is the added landing lag. 10 frames of the advantage, the minus advantage, occurs on the ground. So it's very easy to find that gap when they land and they cannot block for you to start a touch of death combo, right? Now the guard cancel itself, when you perform it, it freezes the frame for 25 frames. That's a pretty short time to react to things. If you think about vanish, the freeze frame lasts for 40 frames, so this is merely half of it, just above the half of the vanish freeze frame. And the startup for the move itself is 21 to 23 frames. Depends a bit on character and their width and so on, and screen positioning, of course. Is it happening in the corner? In the corner it's faster, at mid screen it's slower, because it has more space to travel through, right? It's only active for 2 frames, so when you think about something like an SD, it might be active for the whole duration he's there. Well, the attacker is flying, but with guard cancel it's actually a proximity active, and when we're talking about proximity, it means when the character is at a certain distance, it becomes active. It's Yamcha's 236M, the command cross-up Rekka, acts the same way. It has a proximity counter that when it reaches the proximity, it teleports behind the opponent, and if it doesn't reach the proximity in a certain time interval, the cross-up never happens. But that's mainly just at full screen and so on. And then you can see this is the guard cancel recovery. Even if you whiff a guard cancel, say Hit is standing with his hands in his pockets, being invulnerable and engulfed in flames, and you land on ground, you still have 10 frames of recovery. Basically, how it's stated here is that it just turns into an SD after the actives run out, and it doesn't make contact. So, then we have Vanish. It's 16 frames startup. This might be a bit misleading, like, hey, what the fuck, I thought it was 4 frames. Yeah, it's 4 frames invulnerable, from 4 frames to 8 frames. But it takes 16 frames for it to deliver the attack, which means on the 8th frames it has swapped sides and appears on the 12th frame. But there's a freeze frame for 40 frames already, so you can easily buffer something like a 2H or something to counter the move. It's rather easy, or should be. And you can see when we were talking about the damage scaling on prorations, if you manage to start a combo with something like a pre-called assist and then vanish, you hit the opponent with vanish and convert with the pre-called assist, the combo still does no damage. It already is at 50% half the scaling table, and in a combo it prorates by +5, which, well, is the equivalent of 5 hits. You can ideally you could add 5 850s in that one +5, but vanishing just kills your combo scaling very quickly. I should make a note about empty vanish here, though. Empty vanish does not kill your scaling at all because it's not an attack, but it does kill your meter. More about meter, I can talk about it later in another video or another text post. This is my username over at the Hit Discord channel, is making a hit document which has my findings on these meter kill penalties and stuff like that, and more about HP and HP regeneration and little tidbit information like that. Reflect, we talked about Reflect. Spark 7 frames active. It deals damage, or causes the attack on the 7th frame. Basically, I should state that actually its damage is 0, but it's invulnerable from 1 to 15 frames, so it acts as a reversal and can be done from block stun as well, which was implemented in, I think, patch 1.14, I think. But yeah, okay. Basically has +3 cancelable landing recovery, which causes this move to be pseudo negative on block. So we talked about it's 0 advantage on block, right? But it's minus 1 frame, because if you cancel it to an attack, you can only do it on the 2nd frame of landing, and -3 of and -3 for movement, because you need to suffer the entire landing lag. Basically, this +3 doesn't need advantage. It means that there's an added 3 frames of well, let me rephrase that. Added 3 frames cancelable landing lag recovery, which causes this move to be pseudo negative on block. Okay. And then we have things like jump. Well, we talked about jump, but there's more to it than that. Jump is airborne on the 5th, and the jump startup on the ground is from 1 to 4, but it's only cancelable on the 6th frame, so the 2nd frame you're airborne, and air dashable cancelable on the 8th frame. And this makes things pretty interesting, actually, because when we look at the air dashes, like air dash forward, well, it happens on the very first frame you input it, and the total animation is 10 frames, but normal special cancel, SD cancel, vanish cancel from 7th frame forward, which means you have 6 frames of air dashing before you can do anything. And this is fun tidbit information when we think about things like instant air dash. Well, here we have this 5 frame of jumping, basically. Then we have the 3 frames to achieve that 8th frame of air dash cancelability, and then 6 frames of the air dash itself. It's rephrased here as well. So when you think about it, you're jumping, now you're 5 frames, 3 frames to achieve the cancelability for dashing, 6 frames. Well, it makes, in short, that 5 plus 9, 14 frames before your air dash is cancelable to an attack. And if you do something like a JL, which on most characters won't even reach a crouching or a standing opponent even, you usually need to do something like a medium, which is usually around 9 to 10 frames in the air. Your fastest instant overhead easily can come something close to the universal overhead when performed in stagger pressure. It's just that the jump isn't cancelable from an attack recovery cancelable like the 6M is. Now, the backdash I mentioned, it's totally invulnerable for 15 frames, but this is the fun fact about air backdashing as well. It's more of a state, kind of like jump is. So, I mean this instant air dash on the back. It doesn't have to be instant air dash, it's just air dash. It's 15 frames and cancelable again on the 7th, just as the forward one. But the thing is, it's a state, so it's throw invulnerable from 1 to 15, and if you cancel it into attack on the 7th frame, for instance, the move you cancelled it into still inherits the throw invulnerability from the air dash. So whatever you do within those 7 to 15 frames, you're still throw invulnerable for that set period of time. And it can be actually good to punish things like Android 16 trying to air grab you in his snap Oki, for instance, because you might not be keen on pressing a button during the air dash because you think if you press a button you lose the throw invulnerability and it catches you, but this is in fact incorrect. You can punish if just the hitboxes allow them, if they happen to correspond. Now we're talking about backdash. Its total animation is 15 frames, throw invulnerable from throughout its entire animation, and it starts moving on the 2nd frame. Now this can be a bit misleading when you think about things like can I backdash under vanish pressure? Yeah, most of the time yes, but if we're on -3, -4, yeah, probably still can backdash, but it's all dependent on the boxes, how broad your character is, how big the hitbox on the opposing character's attack is. So you just need to know. And we talked a bit about landing lag. It's all also stated here. Now these are fun things. Some of these I mentioned as well. Block stun buffer is 3 frames inside the block stun, which means that if you're struck with an attack, the last 3 frames of the block stun will register your inputs. If you mash a 5L, it doesn't matter in the block stun. For only the 3 last frames matter. That's why tick throw setups are actually hard to tech. If you think about something like throwing a low block stun assist like Trunks and then meaty dragon rushing the opponent from it once you exit the block stun, you basically need to tech the throw within 4 frames because you have only 3 frames of buffer and 1 frame once you're free when you can. It's difficult. Mashing is usually safe, but it doesn't guarantee you'd be mashing that fast to reach that 4 frame window. Assist call penalties from blocks stun 20 frames, so this game implemented some game changer mechanics back in the day, which caused that when you block an attack you can immediately call an assist afterwards you exit the block stun, which makes stagger pressure a nightmare nowadays as well. Wait, universal key blast non-cancelability. I lied to you there. It's 6 frames, not 5 frames. I apologize. But yeah, we talked about this. Change penalty from block stun. This could need a bit more further testing, but when you're basically using the input for holding down the assist button and changing the character, 24 frames is the earliest the change can occur with that method after exiting block stun. And these things I mentioned as well. Airborne block stun adds 2 frames of additional block stun, and landing during block stun adds 6 frames. So yeah, I've been rambling for quite some time, and if you made it this far, I am honestly impressed. This Finnish old man rambling about stuff you probably won't even need in the future, or probably won't even need, things you may have known or may never use. Anyway, I thank you for taking the time to review this video and watch it. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'm often online. I'm online basically every day. I'm a busy man, but I have a Reddit account, I have a Discord account, I have a Twitter account, YouTube account, whichever way you can reach me, please feel free to do so. And the video description, I will be filling it with useful resources and guiding you towards resources you may have not been available to you, or you may have not known of, but now will be. Thank you again, and yeah, catch you later.